Well, hello everyone. You know, I had that interview with Models of Life about JMRI, and after having that interview and a few conversations I had on Facebook with folks, it became apparent that maybe I need to do a video on setting up DecoderPro and how to use DecoderPro. In particular, Rich Snyder contacted me wanting to know how to speed test and how sound decoders and all that works. So what I'm going to do is, this is kind of a special edition because it's just on setting up JMRI and how I speed test and do different things like that. And so I want you to come on in. We're going to do a little computer work and show you how that works. And I hope it's helpful to you. Again, JMRI is absolutely fantastic, and it makes running and programming decoders just so much more easier and quicker. So please come on in and let me show you what we've got. Well, here we are next to the dispatcher's desk, and this is basically my program track. It also has power, so I can run it on right here, a locomotive right here. And what I use is this Baracus MTS-DCC. Now, they make a couple products that you can use. One has a little console all by itself, and it prints off the labels and everything. You can put it into a book if you're a paper person. But I like this one because it's designed to plug in right to my computer. And then I can take the download data, and I'll show you what I do with it. But what this basically is these are saddles that basically the wheels roll on. So when I provide power to the locomotive here, I can actually run it. And I can actually break my locomotives in right here next to my dispatcher desk where my computer and everything is located. So that's my setup. This is a little device. What it has is a cable that has a speed recorder, and that actually goes into the computer and saves the data. And it just plugs in, and I'll actually show on the computer. We're going to set that up, and I'll show you how I set that up. It's not very complicated. You just install the drivers, but I'll show you everything it's got to do to set that up in JMRI, and then what I do with the data when we get there. So hang on just a second. We're going to break over to the computer. Okay, so here we are at my computer, and I didn't show you hooking up the cables. I figured you're bright enough to figure that one out on your own, and each of the manufacturers has a cable. I'm going to assume that you're either a DCC or an NCS. As I spoke in the podcast, I use Easy DCC. It's a little different system. It's very similar to NEC in many ways, but it's a little more of a DIY system. So the cable I had to build myself, which is something that John does on a regular basis, working for the IT department at the Department of the Navy. So actually it was easy to just look at John and say, I need this, and we created it, and there we go. So just kind of going into what's going on. So I've actually installed JMRI here. You can see that right here. Now I have two monitors set up. I'm accustomed to working with two monitors, so you'll see me slide things off to the left-hand side. That's just going to another monitor, just so I cannot have it quite so cluttered here. But as you can see, here's JMRI DecoderPro 3. This is what we're going to use. Panel Pro is what I use for my CTC and all that. And again, that's getting a little more advanced. We're just going to focus on DecoderPro. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up DecoderPro. Wait, before I do that, I'm going to show you when you install everything, what and where goes where. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the computer, the start menu. I'm going to right click on the computer and pull up properties. And that's going to bring me up to the control panel properties. I'm going to hit the device manager. And I'm going to just close this screen down right here. Okay, so this right here is my Baracus speed interface. And you can see the drivers are not installed, and the computer has no idea what it is. Now, right here where you see COM and LTP ports, you're going to see two devices here. One is a local buffer USB. That's a local net, and that actually connects straight to my computer. You see it is on COM port 3 right there. And then the communication port on COM1. That's actually my Easy DCC system. And I'm going to start that up right now. So those are turned on and ready to go, and we'll show you what happens. But what I want to do is I want to get this driver installed. So that driver is actually located in this little device right here. And I'm just going to simply open up the drivers for the, whoop, wrong one. And there's the drivers right there as you saw me click through them. So again, they're in USB, Windows, and they're IFI. Now what I'm going to do is simply go right here. I'm going to say I want to update the drivers. I'm going to browse my computer. I'm going to look in computers. It happens to be on my CD drive. I can actually go right down here to USB and say for Windows, and right there, and say OK, and hit next, and it's installing the drivers. Now this, they don't have them signed by Microsoft. That doesn't mean it's the end of the world. In this case here, Microsoft wants everybody to, you know, get their okie dokie to make it work better. But in the case here, we know it works. We're going to go ahead and install it. And that's what it's doing right now. And this is like watching paint dry. I'll probably pause this and then come back. And there we go. So the interface is up. And you can see right over here, it hasn't changed at all. So I'm going to close this down. And boom, it went there. And look, it already assigned a COM port. You didn't have to do anything. So all you got to do is simply note these COM ports right here. You don't have to write them or memorize them or anything, because I'm going to show you what happens when you go to DecoderPro. So we're going to start JMRI DecoderPro 3. Now I use Panel Pro a lot. Panel Pro is for building CTC panels, running lights and things like that. We're not going to cover that in here. We're just going to work on the DecoderPro. So I'm going to click on DecoderPro, and I'm going to add a new layout here, and I'm just going to call it the Colorado Front Range Railroad, and I'm going to say OK, and there it is right there. Now when you start it up, there's sometimes one that says My JMRI Railroad. That works fine too. You can select that one. They're going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to start this wizard here. So what I would do is I'd hit next, and it's going to select your language. I would suggest you select the one that you speak the most fluently. It's never fun to work in German if you don't know anything in German. And then the railroad owner. For those of you who have multiple railroads, you might want to rename this to a different railroad name or whatever it is that you want to do. But in any case, you know, it's the owner. And then you hit next, and now you're going to start your connections. So the very first thing you're going to notice when you click in here is that you have all kinds of choices here. You find your system. So if you're on a Sprague DCC, if you're using RFIDs, obviously that's not controlling trains, but all these are interfaces that you can use. I happen to use EasyDCC, so there's Digitrax, there's EasyDCC. The next thing I have to do is tell it what kind of interconnection I have. Now, not all of the DCC systems have options. In my case, I do. I'm using a serial connection, so I'm going to click on that. And this is where it comes into knowing that COM port. But if you open it up on Digitrax 3, you'll notice that all the COM ports are listed. In this case here, I want COM port 1. Now I've got some additional settings that I'm going to, that I'm going to be adding to this, because I showed you that I have 3 of them. So I'm going to just hit next. It's going to finish. And there we go. We're now into DecoderPro. But I'm not done making connections here. So I'm going to go to Edit. I'm going to hit Preference again. And this screen is going to pop up here. I have 2 more devices I need to connect into this system. So another one that I want to connect is I want to connect I'm going to add, and in this case here, I'm going to add my Baracus. and that's my speedo. Notice I only have one selection, and it's already selected on COM 4 because it was a match. I can hit save, and it's going to ask me to restart. I'm going to ask it to restart later because I'm going to add another preference. I'm going to add another connection, and this time I'm adding a connection called is go to Digitrax, and I'm going to select LocalNet USB buffer. It already knows it's on cam. The station I'm using is none of the above. I'm using a local buffer PC. Now, these connections and all apply to me when I'm using Panel Pro, but I wanted to show you at least another connection so you could see different ways of connecting. And I'm going to save this as well, and now I will restart. So it's going to restart. There's my railroad already there. I hit enter, and I don't have to do anything more. Everything is already set up. There's my speedo, it's all set up. My local net is all set up, and my EZDC are all there, and everything is up and running. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to break away here for a second because I got to put a locomotive on my workbench here and get it up and running so that you guys can actually see what happens when you do the programming. So at this point in time, I'm going to pause, and I'll come back. Okay, so now I've got an E8 sitting on the track, and on my program track, and I've got it set to program, and we're going to get started. Now, I could hit identify locomotive, and if that locomotive was actually in my roster, it'll actually pick it up and pull the programming up right away. And it's currently reading it. It takes a little time, but what it does is it reads the manufacturer ID on it and the address, and then it comes back. But as you can see, there's no roster here. Now, if I was on my regular one, yeah, there'd be a roster here. Maybe. I don't know. Long conversation. So, but in any case, I can do a new locomotive. And by the way, these additional screens here, they just give you step by step exactly what I'm doing right here. And they'll disappear after a while. But I'm going to sit here and hit new locomotive. Now I can ask to read it, or if I know the decoder, which this happens to be a train control systems decoder. It's actually a very old one. But what I'll do is I'll just simply say read from the decoder. And so it will begin to read the decoder. It'll read the appropriate CVs, and it's going to come back and probably tell me not exactly what one it is, but at least which ones it could be. Now this is a decoder that's over 15 years old, as you can see. And if you're like me, you've been in DCC for a while, you've got these decoders or locomotives that you've been building over all the years, and they have these ancient decoders. And that's part of what I've been wanting to do, is change these over to more modern decoders and actually go to just one manufacturer. But obviously, to do 100 locomotives at, let's say, $50 a piece, that's a lot of cash to lay out all at one time. So what I'm going to do is, I happen to know that this is a T1 decoder, so I'm going to select a T1 here. And that is actually the actual address. It read that, and it's all there. So I'm going to save this. I need to put an ID in here. So what I need to do in here is put in, and I use a format that works for me. So this is a CB and Q, I'd say E8, and then I give it the address, which is 9942. Whoop! Don't hit shift for numbers. 9942. And that's the format I use. And now I will save this. And here it is. It's been added to my roster. And I can close the rest of this right here. Now, if I want to work with this particular locomotive, which I do, It's on the programming track. I'm going to actually, and there's the information right there. And now I'm going to start typing in, and this is where DecoderPro really shines. So I can actually type a whole mess of information here. C, B, and Q. The road number, of course, is 9942. And the manufacturer, this is an old proto. Oops. Hard to do when you got a microphone in front of you. Proto. I'm still missing some letters. 2000. And this is a Lifelike, not a Walthers. And then the model is a E8. And then you can see here the top limit of the speed is at 100%. The Decoder family is from the 2000. It's a T1. If I want to put any comments in here, I can do this. Now I can save to roster. Now I'm going to close this again. So all this information gets filled in. This is great for pulling Excel spreadsheets if you want to keep track of your rosters, what they are, what the road numbers are, and all those type of things. It's really very handy. Again, we're going to go into programming again. Whoop, I need to select the locomotive, so I'm going to select and I'm going to hit programming here. Now, what DecoderPro does is all the different settings that are available on this locomotive are all up here at the top. There is no setting that's in here that you cannot control. I can use long addresses, short addresses, primary addresses, all this type of stuff is in here. The key ones for me is that it's wired correctly and forward. I use 28128 step, and then other than that, I leave it alone. This is my acceleration, deceleration rate, the dither features, which were available on those old decoders. They're all there. Is it back EMF enabled or not? You simply just select these or unselect them, and then you would simply say either write changes, read changes. So if I want to read, I could read this full sheet, and I click on it, and now my DCC system is queuing the locomotive, and it's actually going to read each and every last one of the settings you see on this sheet right here, and it's going to give us a value here. It takes a little time, so I highly suggest to have a cup of coffee or something sitting next to you, and then when it's all done, it'll stop reading the sheet. There you go, and that is exactly what it's at. So there it's set at everything right there. Now, the real question comes into speed tables and getting them to match one another. So I'm going to actually show you what I do to go through that, but I want to give you how I go about setting a baseline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this Excel spreadsheet, and this is 2 F units. These 2 F units, I used it. This right here is the steps and the actual speeds, and I'll show you how we generate those numbers right there, and then I graph them out and I try to get them to match as closely as possible. So there is a pair of locomotives that are matched. Now the goal is to have, eventually I have a master list, and as I add locomotives they will all match, and so my freight locomotives will travel at a constant rate. My passenger locomotives will have another rate that they go at, and my switcher locomotives will have another rate. As you can see, these are freight locomotives. They at step 1 they say 0, but at step 2 they do, one of them does 1.5, the other one does 5.5. That's about 3 miles apart, and that goes all the way up to step 29, which is 28, and you can see one is doing 53.8 miles an hour, and the other one's doing 52.6. So for a pair of matched locomotives, that's pretty darn good. So how I get this data, we're going to just slide this off to the side here because we're going to use it here in a minute. Here's the speed tables that we're going to adjust. Now just be aware of on each of the decoders, and you need to have the instructions in front of you when you work with these. They kind of work a little different. So if I use the mid starting voltage or the starting voltage mid-range, the max, I cannot use my speed table. And I want to use my speed table because that's how I'm going to match my locomotives. So I'm going to minimize this for a minute, and I'm going to pull up my speedo. There's my speedo right there. Now, what this is going to do is, you can see this has got across the bottom here steps 1 through 28 and the miles per hour. This is my wonderful dial gauge right here. It's set to miles per hour. For those of you who want to use metric, you can use metric, or you could switch to numbers. It'll actually give you numbers. I like the dial. I'm old-fashioned, so I'm going to do it. Here is the different scales that you can use. And in my case, I am using HO, so I want 1/87th. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set in here, this is a throttle, so I'm going to actually assign this throttle a locomotive. And in this case, it's 9942, the locomotive we were working on. I'm going to set that. Now, I'm going to power it up, and then I'm going to hit start. And you will see it go, little red dots come across here as it applies power, and then you will see the gauge moving here, and you will see it plot that speed. So here we go, going to hit start. And it takes a little while. And you do have to put it in run mode. And there it goes. It right away at step 1, it jumps up to well over 30 miles an hour. And it just keeps going, and we just sit here and watch it roll. You know, it's exciting. It's like watching paint dry, isn't it? It's really just through the roof here. And we're up to step 10. And we're doing about 50. So as you can see, this locomotive has its speed table absolutely wiped out. It's actually as it comes straight out of the manufacturer. And it's going to do an incredible breakneck speed. Now this is a passenger locomotive. My freight locomotives I want them to be doing no more than 55 miles an hour. And you might be able to hear the locomotive sitting next to me. I don't know if you'll hear it or not. And we're almost there. Step 25. And voila, we went all the way through. So, you can see this locomotive was up to, it says here on the chart here 160, but I actually was watching on the gauge. It does actually about 80 plus. So we could actually export this if we wanted to, and we can use it. But I'm going to make my first adjustment on this right here. So obviously I'm going way too fast. So I'm going to pull up. I got to find my chart here. I want to slow this down quite a bit. Now, I have a really unique problem because it just won't get there. But I want my locomotives these passenger locomotives to probably be about no more than 65 miles an hour. So if this is 80, and so I'm going to, and again, this is not exact science. We're going to redo this again. I'm going to say that I want to cut this down in half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this point right here, and I'm going to slide it down, and you can see up here at the top, these are the numbers. These are the values that you actually put in for each of the CVs. So it's now being set to 229, 229, 229. As you watch, it'll pull all the way across here. So I want about half the speed, we're going to say. And then I've got it to there. And I'm going to say match the ends. So it's automatically set these up. I've got it now set to a CV of 155, and as you can see, it starts at 0, 5, 11, 17. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to write the changes on the sheet. And I'm going to I got to stop it here. It's really important that you shift it to program when doing things. So it's got to go through this process here. In a minute here, it'll come back. All right, we're going to write the sheet. So I'm going to just, now this time there's no changes, so I'm going to have to change it and say write the full sheet. And now the computer is taking control of the DCC system and is actually programming each of those CV values right into there. And as you can see, this is by far so much more faster than doing it manually, saying this CV, this value all the way through there. Okay, so now it's done. I'm going to shift back to my program, back from program to running, and I'm going to run this again. So I'm going to simply hit start, and it's going to start it again. Well, good morning. I worked on the locomotive for about 25 minutes last night and then decided I was hungry, and so I said, well, I'll pick this up in the morning. So in any case, here we are. Again, this is a Train Control Systems KAT14 decoder, and I'm trying to get this locomotive, which remember in the beginning when we first started off, it would jump up to about 20 miles an hour and then this line would begin. And was very spread out and was actually reaching up to over 70 miles an hour. So what I do is I basically start in this area here, this dither frequency and amplitude, and it works kind of like a nudge in the old DC systems. It just is a little kick that kind of gets that motor started. And so you kind of have to adjust that, and I find the best way to do that is to have the shell off and to be looking at the drive shaft, because sometimes you'll see it begin to spin and then stop again, and then it'll sit for a while as it goes through different frequencies. So you kind of have to see it and adjust it. Now this back EMF, this helps the decoder know that the locomotive is running, and it, believe it or not, it actually helps even in the low end side. I know there's a couple other things that it's used for, the manufacturers talk about, but I find that if I cut it off and I try to do it, my response time of the locomotive may be really low. So I do kick it in here. Now I can decide to cut it off at any value between 1 and 128. And I kind of mess with it to see how the locomotive responds. And sometimes I want it up all the way up, like in this case I have it all the way up. I've had a couple locomotives where I have it actually shutting off about halfway through. So that's kind of one of those things that you have to adjust. The nice thing about this is I can actually assign a value as a function key, and I can actually turn off the back EMF. So if I'm working with a lash up and I seem to be having some problems, and that'll be as we begin to move through, I'll keep notes of, hey, this locomotive. And again, that's part of running a large fleet on a large layout, is keeping notes on locomotives and sometimes how they work best electronically. The other thing I'm working on is the speed control chart, and this is where the real trial and error is. Once I get this responding and I see a real good response on the low end, I then have to kind of take a look at, as it's running here, I'll note what step did I finally get some motion in it and how fast it was, and then I can make a guesstimation of where to slide these values. Again, these just slide up and down just like so, and that's how you actually get them to work. And bingo, there you go, you set it and you write it, and it actually writes each one of these is a CV and a value, and you just hit write, and the bloomin' thing writes, and it would just go to town. And then when you finish it up, you want to make sure that you save the file. Now, I'm not going to save it. I already did, but because I adjusted some of the values here, I don't want to mess with it after I've already got it done. So now I'm going to go over back to my Speedo here. I'm going to close this out. Nope, cancel. I'm just going to minimize that. And what I want to do now is I want to take this data and I want to be able to compare it to my other locomotives. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this data. Now you can see it it puts it in my railroad information here, and I actually will take on my actual railroad that I'm using, on my JMRI that I'm using, I have a file that I keep all this data in so I can pull it up if I need it again. This happens to be the way I use to name my files. I'm going to cancel here for a second. I use the exact same name that I used in my roster entry. See this ID right here? That's exactly the same file that I'm using when I export it. So I'm going to export it. There it is. And then I would save it. Now that puts it into a file that's called a comma delineation, I believe. I think I might be saying it wrong, but in any case, it's a file that right here it is. And we're going to open that file location. It's a file that can be used by Excel, but it can't be used straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my Excel file in here. I'm going to open up a new file. So I'm going to open. And I'm going to open it in, I actually just need to go back. Whoops, cancel here. I want that file location, so I'm going to open this up, click on it. I'm going to copy it and go back to Excel here. I'm going to say File. I want to open this file right here. And of course Excel says, oh my gosh, this might be dangerous. It's just a text file that I just generated, so I'm going to say yes. And as I said, it's a comma delineation file. So I've got it here clicked right here. Here's what the file looks like in text form. It's just got the different squares right here and numbers. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say take this right here. We're going to start importing on row 1, which is fine. Now I'm telling it that I want it broken down by commas. So what it'll do is it'll put it into commas, and each one of these across the face here would actually give you another value right here. So 1 is the step, you see there, and then over here is the speed. And then after that I say next. It's just general data, so I'm just going to leave it the way it is, and I'm just going to say finish. Now once I do that, here's that file in an Excel spreadsheet. So I want to turn this into something graphically that I can understand. So I'm going to just simply go over here and I'm going to tell it I want it to be a line graph. And I just simply select this right here. Now, there's a couple different things you can do with this. First of all, and I suggest that you mess with graph just a bit. But one of the things it's doing is it's grafting this first step right here, which I really don't need. So if I click on this and say delete that, now this is the useful part. This is my steps down at the bottom, and this is my miles per hour. And I simply, and then it's telling me that this is what it is. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to insert, and I'm going to put in here that this is C, B, and Q 9939. And I'm going to take this value right here. I'm going to delete this, and now I'm going to label this. Now that's fine. I can just work with it right here. And that's exactly how I start my graphs. And you can play with graph. It's kind of fun to mess with it right here. Now, what I really want to do is I want to take this data right here and I want to copy it. Because earlier you saw my graph of my E3s. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to just slide my graph over a little bit. And I'm going to paste this value back in. And now
add this value to the graph. Oop. Helps if I get the right ones. There we go. Now, there you go. Now I've got all three. Now this gives you a comparison. This is my freights down here, and this is my passenger train. So you can see the lines are a little different. Again, these guys are stopping at 55 miles an hour, and this guy's going up to 65. So it kind of gives you an idea. So down in the low end, they'll all respond pretty close to one another at that 10 miles an hour, but as we begin to move up. So that's why I break my locomotives up. Now if you take a look at these, again, they're all within 3 miles when you start getting down at the low end, but then you start getting to up to over 20 miles an hour, and you can see they start to change and start to gain speed a little faster, and this one goes all the way up to 68. So that's how I work with them, and I hope that's helpful. I hope that gives you some idea of some of the different ways that you can use JMRI. It helps for doing speed matching and things like that, and I hope that this is helpful. Rich Schneider, who originally started asking me the questions, who actually caused me to have to decide to do this video. He asked me in particular about tsunamis and those, and I showed you a train control systems decoder. This is my 2882, which has a tsunami in it, and I'm going to open this up because the thing about JMRI is that all the decoders have all their special features on here. So the roster entry is the same. The basic entry is the same. The motors you can see are a little different. Here we got the different values that you can have in back EMF. Speed control is pretty much the same, and the speed tables are the same. But then you get into the function maps, and this is all the different functions that can be used on this decoder. So this is the white wire, the yellow wire, Rule 17, the FX6 mode, whistles, bells, and everything else. You just simply change where you want them on your function map. And you simply just change it, click on it, and then tell it to write it, and that's what's going to happen. By the way, if you notice, you can actually have two functions on different buttons. Don't recommend it. But in any case, you have that. If there's a lighting effects, which this one doesn't have a lighting, but on the diesels there are lighting effects. Those are available here. You got your bell point set rates. You can just slide these sliders up and down and change them, and then you would just read them and go through with this. This is the dynamic digital exhaust controls. Again, you can just slide these and adjust them, and then you just play them. You can adjust your reverb on your devices and everything else. The tsunami lighting here for this setting into here is for the steam. You control sound levels, the types of sounds. So if you want, articulated versus a rod chuff, and all these different settings you can all adjust into this locomotive here. All the different settings that are available are all in here. If you're consisting them together, you might have some special rules. So that all comes into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just simply do a simple test with, let's do something that, I don't know, let's look at, like if you got an equalizer, I'm thinking we'll probably do something like, I'm looking for the whistles, sound levels. So we have our master, so I'm going to hit my sound here and see if you can hear the whistle. Okay, so that's my whistle volume. If I think it's too loud, I can turn it down. I don't know if you'll hear it when I do this, but I'll give it a shot. I'm going to write the change. Again, I didn't have to know the CVs or anything. I just simply came in here and did that. I turn it back on and I hit my whistle. And that's how you basically change all the different things that are in here. And again, each decoder has its own different sets. You can, you have the instructions there, but that you don't have to memorize the CV values or anything like that. And so this is just how you can use JMRI to run the sound decoders. So I'm going to break away here, and we'll be back in just a second.
Well, I hope you found that helpful. That's how I use JMRI for doing my speed matching of locomotives and different things. In the podcast on JMRI with A Modeler's Life, I talked about using cheap phones from Walmart. Well, I happened to be down there to pick up a couple, and I came across a product I had never seen before, and I really liked it, and so I picked up one. This is called an RCA Voyager 2, and it works very similar to an iPad. And here I've got the JMRI throttle on here, though it's not turned on, so it's not connected to anything. But it basically allows me to use this as a throttle, and I kind of like it a little better than the phones because it still fits in my hand, but it's bigger. And I like to push buttons and turn knobs, and unfortunately we find that that's not appropriate anymore, so we all have to have touch screens. But nonetheless, this is to me a much better product for doing that than phones. So nothing wrong with the phones. The phones work. I've got one, but I picked up two of these, and these were just $20 more than the phone. So they were under $50. And for two of them, I was like, perfect. And that's still cheaper than buying a Wi-Fi throttle from any of the manufacturers. So in any case, hope you enjoyed the special. This was, again, something I didn't plan on, but I thought after having the conversation with JMRI, it'd be appropriate to have this video. So anyway, to all of you, happy modeling, and looking forward to seeing all of you at the National Model Railroad Convention.